Okay, again, welcome to Transition Tuesday. Tonight we'll be speaking about government benefits, and I will turn it over to you, Michael.
Thank you, Laura. And my name is Michael Beloff. I'm a financial advisor with Belvedere Wealth Partners. My primary job is working with families to do their long-term investing and financial planning. But I have a specialty working with families with special needs children. Like many of you, I have a child with special needs. My son, Ben, is 26 and has diagnoses of autism and an intellectual disability. He is currently served through DDS. I am a certified financial planner and chartered financial consultant, and I serve on a number of advisory boards, including the Board of Ableist, which is a DDS agency in Southwest Connecticut, the Connecticut Council on Developmental Services, and on the advisory board of the U.S. Autism Association. But tonight, we're going to be talking about government benefits and how your child will qualify for them, and how it all works. So if we can go to the first slide, I think, Claudia, you had that at the last slide. If we can go to the first slide of the presentation. There we go. So again, we'll be talking about government benefits. And why don't we go to the next slide? As a financial advisor, I'm in a highly regulated industry, so we have to have these disclaimers up. We'll be talking about a lot of legal and financial terms. You should know this is not to be considered legal advice, but we will be talking about a lot of these things. Why don't we go to the next slide? There we go. So we're going to be talking about a number of government benefits. These include Supplemental Security Income, Medicaid, SNAP, and Housing Choice Voucher Program. These are all means-tested benefits that may be available to individuals with disabilities. We'll also be talking about two non-means-tested benefits programs that your children may be eligible at some point, which will include Social Security Disability Income as well as Medicare. We're not going to be going into too much details about services through the Department of Developmental Services, or DDS, which may be available to your children. Today, we're really focusing on the main government benefits. Why don't we go to the next slide? So I put a little chart of the benefits on the first page because these are broken into monetary benefits, benefits that will give your child money to help them pay for things, usually mostly as an adult. Those include SSI, SNAP, SSDI, and Section 8 vouchers, as well as medical benefits such as Medicaid and Medicare. One of the challenges in planning for our families is a lot of these benefits sound similar, and people do mix them up, and it's very common that folks do that. There is a big difference between Medicaid, which is generally health insurance for financially needy people, and Medicare, which is health insurance for typically seniors, as well as certain other folks who are getting certain benefits. There's also a very big difference between SSI, the main means-tested income payment, and SSDI, which is an income payment that's not based on financial need. We will be going through each of these benefits, how they differ, and how someone qualifies for them. Why don't we go to the next slide? So I think it's important for folks to understand the government's definition of disability, which is different from how you and I think about it. All of you are here because you have a child with a disability. But I want to make a distinction as to how the federal government and essentially the state government for access to benefits and services looks at disability. Typically, most organizations will use Social Security's definition of disability. And it changes. There is one definition when your child is under 18 and a second definition when your child is over 18. When they're under 18, you are disabled. Let's call it federally disabled. If you have a medically determined physical or mental impairment, which results in a marked and severe functional limitation. That is the definition the government you will use for disability when your child is under 18. But when they turn 18, 18 is a magic age. Your child is a legal adult. And so the definition of what it means to be disabled changes from having a marked and severe functional limitation to having a disability which results in the inability to engage in substantial gainful activity. What does that mean? Substantial gainful activity is Social Security speak for working. So as an adult, you are only disabled if you have a disability that prevents you from working. That substantial gainful activity is a bar. And for this year, for 2024, you are only disabled as an adult if your disability prevents you from earning more than $1,550 a month. Now, you should know that many of these numbers we'll talk about are year-by-year numbers. They change from year to year. In fact, the federal government just announced the numbers for 2025. For 2025, you could earn $70 more and still be disabled. So for 2025, the substantial gainful activity amount, the amount that if you are capable of earning above, that you are not disabled, for next year will be $1,620. I think when you're applying for benefits for your child at 18, which is when most of you will apply for benefits and services for your child, it's important to keep this definition in mind as to what the government is looking for. They're not looking to see if your child has a disability. All of you are here because your child does. They're looking to see if the disability will prevent them from working above that SGA amount that for this year is $1,550 a month. Let's go to the next slide. So we're first going to talk about means-tested benefits. And unfortunately, most benefits and services for adults with disabilities, as well as children, are based on financial need. You have to be financially needy according to the government in order to access these benefits and services. So it's important to understand these levels and how they work and how they will impact your child's ability to get supports. Let's go to the next slide. So we're going to start with supplemental security income. We'll probably spend the most time on this topic because it leads to the other benefits that are available. This is the main one that most people start with. Let's go to the next slide. So what is SSI? It's a federally funded income supplement program funded from the general tax revenues. SSI is essentially a welfare payment for financially needy disabled adults. It's administered by the Social Security Agency, but it's not funded from Social Security taxes. It's funded from the general resources of the government. So when you hear about the potential of Social Security running out of money, that will not impact SSI because SSI comes from the general budget. SSI is designed to help the aged, blind, and disabled. You'll hear that terminology a lot in disability planning. It's designed to help the aged, blind, and disabled who have little or no income and resources. And it's only given if the disability is expected to last more than 12 months or result in death. Primarily, although not exclusively, the main reason why the government is giving your child this money is because they want to make sure that adults with financial needs can have money for the basic needs for food and shelter. That's going to be important when we talk about how SSI might be reduced in some circumstances. Now, there are some income and asset tests in order to get this SSI payment. And the reason why many families don't get SSI for their younger children is that when your child is under the age of 18, the parent's assets and income are deemed available to the child. And so they're going to base the benefit, the ability to get the benefit, on the parent's money. And essentially, if parents have more than $5,000 in the bank, they are too rich to get SSI for their child who's under 18. However, once your child turns 18 and becomes a legal adult, parent asset and income no longer count against them. You could have $1 billion in the bank, and once your child turns 18, their ability to get SSI is based on their individual assets and income. So it's going to be very, very important to make sure your child doesn't have countable resources after the age of 18 that may prevent them from getting this benefit. Let's go to the next slide. So let's talk about what they can get if they're eligible for SSI. Well, for 2024, the maximum SSI, sometimes called the federal benefit rate, is $943 a month. That's going to go up about $24 next year to $967. But in order to get this benefit, you have to meet a monthly asset test and income test. So for SSI, you can only get this if you have less than $2,000 of countable resources as a single adult. That number has not changed since the 70s. And it is, yes, a very low dollar amount for an adult who's trying to be self-sufficient. But that is the number. And in fact, if your child had any money within 3 years of applying for SSI at 18, the government has the right to ask what you did with that money. That's the easy test to understand. The harder test is the income test. And essentially, because SSI is a welfare program, and it's meant to provide money so that a disabled person can have food and shelter. If the individual receiving it has income themselves, because either they work or they have some unearned income, we'll talk about what that means, then you're going to get less money. Because the government says if you have money, you don't need as much welfare payment. I know it sounds weird, but that's the way it works. Let's go to the next slide. So what counts towards the $2,000 resource test? Well, according to the government, and by the way, if you look at the bottom, you see that under the double star, you see Social Security POMS. There are actually rules to Social Security. They call the Program Operations Manual System. If you ever need to go to sleep one night, read the POMS. They are very hard to read. And so I've cited them if, for those who are watching, want to go and research this themselves, but we'll talk about these things. So a resource, something that counts towards that $2,000 monthly asset test, is cash, bank accounts, stocks, savings bonds. I hate savings bonds. They're always stuck in a drawer. We forget about them. Life insurance, personal property, anything more than one automobile, anything else that could be changed to cash and used for food and shelter. There are certain exclusions. So technically, you can own a home and the value of that house does not count towards the resource test. Not a great idea, especially when we start talking about Medicaid. But theoretically, your child could own their own home. They can own an automobile. They can have household goods, prepaid burial space. If they have SNAP food stamps, that does not count as a resource. And one last thing, if there is a custodial account, if you had opened up a bank account for your child, it may say parent, UGMA or UTMA or custodial account. Um, Technically, that does not count as an asset until your child turns 21 here in Connecticut. But it's a good idea to probably get rid of that so it does not count against them. It can be, unfortunately, easy to accumulate more than $2,000 of assets for your child, especially once your child starts getting that $943 a month when they're eligible. Because if you don't spend it on them, it adds up and would be above $2,000 after about 2 or 3 months. So you will, once you get this payment for your child, you will need to spend it, and we'll talk about some things you can spend it on. Let's go to the next page. In addition, if your child has income, that may impact how much SSI they receive in a month. So income, someone did ask a question, does Chet's savings account count towards that $2,000? Due to a quirk in the law, as long as the 529, and Chet is a type of 529, as long as that 529 is not a custodial 529, the Chet account is not a Medicaid resource of the child or an SSI resource of the child, because you as the parent have the right to switch the money to another kid. Because of that feature of Chet accounts, a Chet account is not considered an asset of the child. So what is income? Income is an item an individual receives in cash or in kind. I'll talk about in kind in a second. That can be used to meet the person's need for food and shelter. If you have income, your SSI will be reduced. So typically, Social Security makes a distinction between unearned income and earned income. Earned income is stuff you get from working. Unearned income includes interest, dividends, but other things you wouldn't think about as income, including cash gifts. If grandma writes a check to your child for their birthday, that's considered income to them. In addition, child support received by the parent, even though it's not paid directly to the child support paid to the custodial parent is considered income for the child and would probably reduce their SSI payment. And finally, there's something called in-kind support and maintenance, which I'm going to defer to the next slide when we get there. Don't go yet. We're still going to stay here for a second. So what happens when you have income? Well, there are some income exclusions. You get to exclude the first $20 a month of general income. And then if you work, you get another $65 of earned income. So if no one gave your kid money in a month, they can make $85 before their SSI is reduced. Those numbers haven't changed since the 70s. In addition, if they're receiving food stamps or medical or social services like services through DDS or the autism waiver, that is not considered income. A tax refund is not considered income. It's just putting that back. And distributions from special needs trusts that were not spent on food and shelter are also not income. But keep in mind, if you have income and you haven't spent it by the end of the month, that becomes a resource. You are allowed to have more than $2,000 in resources during the month. Let's say you had $1,500 and you got $943 of SSI, that would put your resources above $2,000. That's okay, as long as it's spent down below $2,000 by the end of the month. Let's go to the next slide. So how does income reduce SSI? Well, if you have unearned income, grandma writing a check, child support paid on the child's behalf, that unearned income will reduce SSI on a dollar for dollar basis. If grandma writes a $1,000 check for the birthday, God bless grandma, that will wipe out SSI for the month. Because so the government's saying as a welfare payment, if you have other things that can pay for your food and shelter, you don't need our money this month. If your child works, and we're doing a whole workshop on what happens if your child works in next month, the reduction is less. So if you work after that first $85 in a month, your child only loses $1 for every $2 that they earn. So if your child had a part-time job and they made $385 in a month, they get to keep the first $85. The remaining $300 will reduce the SSI by $150. That's how it works. Let's go to the next slide. So let's talk about this in-kind support and maintenance thing, which is very confusing, but it makes sense. The government makes sense in a very twisted way. Oftentimes their rules kind of go like this, but when you understand what they're looking to do, it sort of makes sense in its weird way. So there is a concept in SSI called in-kind support and maintenance. So remember, I mentioned earlier, the main reason the government is giving your child SSI is to help them pay for food and shelter. So if someone gives your child free or reduced cost room and board, that's going to be considered income to them and reduce the SSI on a dollar for dollar basis. The government has a heart. The maximum reduction for SSI only is a third. So how does this impact your child? Well, when you apply for SSI, and most families will apply at 18, we'll talk about that in a second, you've gotten rid of all your kids' money so that they can qualify for SSI, which means they don't have any money to pay you rent until the SSI kicks in. So the government's going to assume your child is not paying rent because they have no money to pay rent because you spent it all, so they can get SSI. So most likely the government will, when your child is approved for SSI, not give them the full $943, but give them a third less, about $630. Once they start getting SSI, you can then charge them rent. I know it sounds weird, but you are allowed to charge your kid rent because the government looks as if your child was some random person living in your house, because they are considered something called a household of one. If you start charging your child rent, and then you tell the government you're charging them rent, you have to tell Social Security, then they'll say, oh, they're paying rent, they're not getting income of in-kind support and maintenance, we'll bump back up their SSI to $943. Now, you do have to charge them the right amount of rent. And I often get a question, what is the right amount of rent? There used to be a bunch of rules about this that all got fixed and changed just about a month ago on January 30th, 2024. Now the rule is you have to charge them at least, for this year, $334.33, which is something called the presumed maximum value, which is a Social Security term, equal to 1/3 of what SSI is that year, plus $20. So this year, if you, and there's used to be all these rules for like paying market rent and pro rata share of expenses, I highly recommend don't using either of those methodologies because you might get yourself in trouble. You will want to tell Social Security that you are charging rent of at least that amount. Now, because SSI goes up every year, the presumed maximum value goes up every year. So if you're going to charge your kid $335 this year, and starting in January, you're still charging $335, that's not going to be enough. Because SSI is going up, the presumed maximum value minimum rent amount is going up from $334.33 to $342.33. Most families will charge $500 or $600 because it's a great way of reducing the amount of money in your kid's account. By the way, you do actually have to charge them the rent, not just tell Social Security you're doing that. And you must take that amount of rent out of their account and put that into your account. I know it's weird, but this is the way the system works. You have to charge your kids rent. What you do with that money afterwards is up to you. Some families I meet very much need that money to survive, and it's okay to spend that money because you're probably spending more than that on your kid anyway. Some families feel funny, and they will then put that money aside and save it for them, either in something called an ABLE account, which we'll cover in a little bit, or in a special needs trust, or just in an account in the parent's name. That's really up to you as to what makes sense for you and your family. Let's go to the next slide. So I want to talk a little bit about the representative payee. So Social Security has a concept that if there is an adult who's receiving SSI, who is not capable of managing their own affairs, Social Security will assign someone to manage the SSI for that individual. And that's called the representative payee. So it's a person appointed by Social Security to manage the SSI or SSDI payment. It can be the guardian or conservator or a parent or another person, but it doesn't have to be. So there are situations where someone is the rep payee and a different person is the guardian, if that makes sense for that person. Of course, not all adults need a legal guardian or conservator, but it is very common for adults with cognitive issues. When your child receives SSI as an adult, the SSI should be placed in a separate account called a representative payee account. This is different. For those of you who are receiving SSI for a minor child, you can have the SSI put in the parent's bank account. That changes when your child becomes a legal adult, when they turn 18. And the SSI should be placed in a separate account because as the representative payee, you have what's called a fiduciary duty to manage the SSI and only spend that SSI on that child. Remember, them paying rent counts as spending on them. And there is an annual reporting requirement to Social Security as to how you spent your child's money. And it is much easier and simpler to provide that report if all their money's in a separate account, making it easier for you to show how you used it. Now, generally, SSI should be used for your child's current needs, including food and shelter. Once food and shelter is taken care of, the money can be used for anything for your child's benefit. Now, as I mentioned, there is an annual report. Social Security has finally realized that parents aren't going to steal their kids' money. So there is a relaxed reporting requirement for parents. But you should be prepared, if asked, to be able to show what you spent your kids' money on. You are also, as the representative payee, required to report changes to Social Security, including if your kid has income. So if you're the representative payee and your child gets a part-time job, not earning enough to make them not disabled, but you are required to report to Social Security when they start a job, when they stop a job. If your child moves, if your child marries, if your child leaves the United States for 30 days, not a great idea. Hint, if they leave the US for more than 30 days, they lose their SSI. It's only for US residents. That is the general gist of SSI. Someone did ask a question about an ABLE account. Beyond a little bit what we're talking about today, but an ABLE account is an exempt resource for SSI and Medicaid purposes. I'm going to the next slide. So now we're going to talk about Medicaid. Next slide. So what is Medicaid? Medicaid is a jointly funded state and federal health insurance program for low-income and financially needy people, geared specifically for children, the aged, blind, and disabled, and other people eligible to receive federally assisted income maintenance payments like SSI. It's administered by a state Medicaid agency. Here in Connecticut, that's the Department of Social Services, DSS. Traditionally, Medicaid has two purposes. It's a health insurance program for people who don't have access to health insurance through work or through the exchange. It's generally for people who are making under a certain dollar amount. But it is also the funding stream for adult services for people with disabilities. So I get a lot of questions sometimes from families because they say, well, we have health insurance through one of our jobs. Why does our kid need Medicaid when they turn 18? They can stay under our health insurance plan through 26. They need it not at that point for the health insurance part. They need it because you don't get services as an adult unless you're on Medicaid. So the Department of Developmental Services, which provides supports for adults with intellectual disabilities, IQs under 70. You don't get anything as an adult unless you're on Medicaid. If you're on the autism waiver, you don't get services unless you're on Medicaid. If you're on the traumatic brain injury waiver, you don't get anything unless you're on Medicaid. These are all Medicaid waiver programs. You don't get it unless you're on Medicaid. Now, here in Connecticut, we call Medicaid Husky because Husky is our state mascot. And we have 4 flavors of Husky: Husky A, Husky B, Husky C, and Husky D. I'm going to explain them to you. Husky A and B are for low-income families with minor children. Husky D is for low-income adults who don't have children and don't have access to other health insurance. What you're going to want as an adult is Husky C as in Charlie, which is traditional Medicaid for the aged, blind, and disabled. That is the only Medicaid that gets adult services through DDS, the autism waiver, and the traumatic brain injury waiver, as well as other Medicaid services like Community First Choice. Let's go on to the next slide. So, how do you get Medicaid? Well, as an adult. How do you get Husky C? That's what we're going to talk about. Again, it's for blind, disabled, and people over 65 who meet an income and resource test. Now, in 34 states, of which Connecticut is not one, if you're getting at least $1 of SSI, you are automatically eligible for Medicaid. However, we are not what's called a 1634 state. We are a 209B state here in Connecticut, and so we set our own rules. And so we have a different rule here in Connecticut. We have a separate, in most states, if you get SSI, you get Medicaid. That is not the case in Connecticut. We have a separate test. And here's the big difference. Connecticut felt that $2,000 was too much money to get access to Medicaid. So our Medicaid asset limit is only $1,600. I have no idea what they think that extra $400 is going to buy, but that's the rule here in Connecticut. So if you had $1,800, you can get SSI in Connecticut, but you can't get Husky C. So if you want your child to get services through Medicaid as an adult, you have to work to the lowest common denominator and keep your child's month-end assets under 1,600 rather than 2,000. That's the big takeaway from this. Like SSI, there's a look back for Medicaid, but unlike SSI's 3-year look back, Medicaid has a 5-year look back. So when your child applies at age 18 with less than $1,600, the Department of Social Services, DSS, our Medicaid agency, has the right to look back 5 years to see if at any point after your child turned 13, did they have more than $2,000? And if they did, what happened to it? And if you don't have a good explanation because your kid had $5,000 and now they only have $1,000 and you can't explain what happened to that money, that could delay their access to receiving Medicaid. We're going to talk a little bit towards the end how to legally get rid of money for your child. But let's go to the next slide. So, what does Medicaid cover as health insurance? To me, Medicaid is a broad but not deep health insurance cover. It covers a lot of things. It covers inpatient and outpatient services, doctors, dentists, pediatrics, x-rays, long-term care in a nursing home, prescription medications, medical supplies, ambulance. The problem is, as a health insurance program, Medicaid reimbursement is very, very low. This is not, I'm using this as an example, this is not literal, but if you have private insurance and you go see a doctor and it will give the doctor $100 for that visit. If you have Medicare and see a doctor, it'll give the doctor $80 for the visit. If you have Medicaid, the doctor gets about $10. Because of the very low reimbursement levels for Medicaid, many private physicians will not accept Medicaid as health insurance. And that's a big challenge here in Connecticut. Typically, the main places you can get Medicaid to pay for services is through a hospital. It is, by the way, if your kid has Medicaid, you can keep, as an adult, you can keep them on your private health insurance. Remember, under the Affordable Care Act, you can keep a child under family health insurance through the age of 26. And so they can be on both the family private health insurance through the employer and Medicaid. Medicaid will be what's called secondary insurance and might pick up things like copays and medications that the primary insurance might not keep up. But it's important that they can have both. You don't need to drop them necessarily. Let's go to the next slide. So this is the important thing that I mentioned before. State services for adults with disabilities are funded through Medicaid. If they're not on Husky C, they're not going to get anything. The most important Medicaid, they call them a Medicaid waiver program because it allows the state to waive certain requirements of base Medicaid. When Medicaid started in the 70s, in the 60s, excuse me, the only services provided were in a nursing home or in an institution like Southbury. Under these waiver programs, the most important one for many families is the home and community-based services waivers, which are the DDS waivers. They allow the services to be provided in the community rather than having to go to an institution. Another important Medicaid waiver is the Katie Beckett waiver, which is available for children. What tends to happen with Katie Beckett is that when you're on the Katie Beckett waiver, that gives the child access to Husky A, which is a Medicaid program for children, as well as sometimes their parents. And typically what happens is, unlike other Husky A people, if you're on Husky A just based on income, you get kicked off of Husky A at 19, and the child converts to Husky D, which is Medicaid for low-income adults. If you have a child on Katie Beckett, typically the Husky A will continue to around 21. I wish I had a better answer, but apparently at some point between 19 and 21, DSS will get around to switching your child to Husky C, as long as they've been deemed disabled by Social Security by going through their disability qualification program. So it's important if your child's on Husky A and Katie Beckett to apply for SSI when your child turns 18. For those who don't know, Katie Beckett is a special Medicaid waiver program for physically disabled children. They can be developmentally disabled or intellectually disabled, but it's only available to children who have severe physical medical needs that will be that need supports. There is a waiting list for that program, as there is for many Medicaid waiver benefits. Let's go to the next slide. So we're done with Medicaid. We're now going to cover SNAP, which is, let's go to the next slide, which is the newfangled name for food stamps. Back in the 60s, you actually had a book of stamps that you would give to the grocer. And even though it's now done with a little debit card, your little silver Medicaid card, everyone still calls it food stamps, even though it's now called SNAP. And SNAP is a federally funded nutrition program that provides a stipend to help low-income people buy food. And it's supervised by the U.S. Department of Agriculture, but administered by state agencies, in our case, by the Department of Social Services. They determine eligibility, the amount of the stipend, and distribute the benefits. While it's primarily a low-income benefit, there are special rules to help people with disabilities qualify in more circumstances than other low-income adults. Let's go to the next page. So, how do you get it? In order to get SNAP, you have to apply to the Department of Social Services. But it's a little funkier than most other benefits for adults with disabilities. When you get it, when you apply for Medicaid here in Connecticut, you get a little silver card. That's your Medicaid card. And it looks like an old style credit card with a stripe on the back. There's just no chip in it. And when your SNAP is turned on, that silver Medicaid card becomes your SNAP card. There's two big differences in how SNAP benefits work versus other benefits. The first is most other benefits, the numbers change in January 1. But because this is administered by the Department of Agriculture, SNAP changes on October 1. So this past October, we got a whopping $1 raise in our SNAP from the maximum SNAP from $291, it's now $292. In addition, unlike other means-tested benefits where parent income and assets stop counting against them, for SNAP only, you're part of your parents' SNAP household until you're 22. Main reason for that is if you allowed SNAP at 18, every college student in America would be on food stamps. So for most families, your child on their own will not be eligible for SNAP until the day they turn 22, at which point you can proactively apply for SNAP on their behalf. So what can you use your SNAP money for? It's meant to be used for grocery food, but it can't be used for certain items. It can't be used for non-food items. It can't be used for alcohol. It can't be used for food eaten in the store or tobacco items, tobacco products. So here's the wacky thing. Like if you go into like the local Acme and they have the chickens under the heat lamp, because that's ready to eat food, you can't use SNAP for that. But if they took that hot chicken and they put it in the next bin where it's cold, you can use your SNAP card for that because it's not technically ready to eat. You can buy a bun and turkey, but you can't buy a turkey sandwich. You don't have to worry about that. The SNAP card knows what you can buy and what you can't. So if you go to the grocery store and you buy some food, but you also get some tinfoil, and you swipe the SNAP card, what'll happen is it'll use the SNAP for the food, and then it'll say you still owe $7 for the tinfoil, and you just put another card into the tinfoil. Parents should not feel funny using SNAP for their child. We use it. My son's 26. He is eligible. We use it to buy his food. It can be challenging to know how much is left on your SNAP card because the state of Connecticut, the only way to see it on the Connecticut websites is to log into DSS, which is a royal pain. There is a wonderful app called the Propel app, used to be called the Providers app, that by plugging in your DSS ID and password, it will give you a little app on your phone showing you how much is left on your SNAP card for the month. It's a great tool. Let's go to the next slide. So I'm not going to spend too much time on this, but there is a whole wacky formula to determine how much you're eligible for SNAP. It's based on household size and income, and there is a separate rule if you're disabled that you get a little bit more or the income counts less. But it is hard to determine. I would recommend if you're not getting the maximum SNAP, there are SNAP calculators. Just type in CT SNAP calculator, indicate that your child's disabled, plug in if they're earning, how much rent they're paying. There's a whole bunch of formula for this, but there's a way to figure it out. I'm speeding up because we're getting close to an hour and I want to make sure we hit everything before the translator leaves. So let's go to the next slide. We're now going to talk about Section 8, which is housing subsidies. Let's go to the next page. These are probably the hardest to get, but you should know the federal government does provide some low-income housing subsidies for low-income families. It can be either tenant-based, meaning that you have a voucher that you could use at any apartment up to certain rules, or it could be project-based, like an affordable housing building. Eligibility is generally based on income. Typically, to get access to Section 8 housing or housing vouchers, you have to make less than 50% of the median income for your area. The example I have in 2020, they only update these every 5 years or so. The median income, half of the median income for the Stamford, Newark area was $50,000, $190. So if you made less than that, and our kids are going to make less than that, you might be eligible for housing vouchers. The problem is it's very hard to get these. The vouchers, which you can use at any apartment you want, are generally only given out by lottery. And the lotteries have generally been closed or closed very quickly. For affordable housing units, you have to talk to your local housing agency to see when there will be openings for those kids who can live, adults who can live more independently. I'm not going to talk about this too much. It is something that's available. It's just hard to get. Let's go to the next slide. We're now going to talk about a couple of non-means tested benefits that your kids may be eligible for at some point. So the first means tested benefits I talked about, all of those are available, SSI and Medicaid at 18, SNAP at 22. These non-means tested benefits take something else to trigger them. Let's go to the next slide. So we're going to talk first about Social Security disability income. Next slide. So SSDI is a different benefit from SSI. It's very, very important to understand which one of these your kid is getting because they have very different rules. SSDI is not a means-tested program. It's based on someone paying into Social Security. You know your FICA taxes? You know that FICA line on your paycheck? That's you paying into Social Security. Typically, in order to get SSDI, you have to work for 40 quarters or 10 years paying into Social Security in order to be eligible for a Social Security disability income payment when you become disabled. However, if you're under 30, you need less years. We'll talk about that. It provides a monthly cash payment, but unlike SSI, it is not reduced but when you work in certain circumstances. More importantly, if you get SSDI for 2 years, you get Medicare, a very different health insurance program. There are generally 2 ways to receive SSDI: under your own work record or under a parent's work record in some circumstances. Let's go to the next slide. So let's talk about qualifying under a parent's work record. So Social Security is a social insurance program designed in the 30s. And the idea was it was meant to help seniors, give them some kind of pension program from the government to help them pay for their old age. And back in the 30s, you may have heard about this, but there are certain ancillary benefits built into Social Security. So you've probably heard about the spousal benefit. Back in the 30s, dad worked, mom stayed home and raised the kids. Dad paid into Social Security, mom never worked. I'm stereotyping, I apologize. But when dad collected his Social Security when he retired at 65, mom got a spousal benefit. She got a Social Security payment equal to 50% of what dad was collecting on top of dad's base benefit. And when dad died, because dad always died first, mom stepped up to a widow's benefit, and she stepped up to a full payment of 100% of what dad was receiving. Similarly, there's an ancillary benefit built into Social Security called the Childhood Disability Benefit. And the concept is, if your child was disabled before the age of 22, Social Security assumes they'll never work, they'll never pay into Social Security, FICA taxes, and therefore never get a Social Security benefit on their own work record. So Social Security has a rule that if your child was continually disabled from before the age of 22 to when either mom or dad got their benefit, that the child is eligible for a childhood disability benefit off of the parent's work record once the parent actually starts receiving their Social Security due to death, disability, or hitting their full retirement age. They get 50% of the parent's primary insurance amount while the parent's alive. The primary insurance amount is the amount that you get at 67. If you're born after 1960, your full retirement age is 67. If you take it early at 62, you get about 30% less. If you wait till 70, you get about 24% more. But regardless of when you take your benefit, anywhere between 62 and 70, your kid gets 50% of what you would have gotten at your full retirement age. And when you die, they step up to 3/4 of your benefit. Now, there's no free lunch. SSDI is considered income for SSI purposes and will wipe out the SSI they were receiving. But that's okay. It's going to be more money. The maximum the maximum Social Security payment right now, if you've maxed out Social Security and you look at your record, the maximum Social Security you can get is about $4,000 a year. That means if you've averaged over $170,000 during your lifetime, then you'll get $4,000. Your kid will get $2,000. $2,000 is a lot better than $943. Let's go to the next slide. We've got a special rule here in Connecticut. If your SSI goes away because of an SSDI payment, you still get to keep your Medicaid. Works a little different here in Connecticut, but we still have a way of doing it. Now, in order to preserve this childhood disability benefit, you have to keep in mind a couple of things. The first is it's predicated on your child being continually disabled from before age 22 until the benefit starts when the parent collects Social Security. So you have to make sure your child isn't going to work too much. If they ever worked so much that they weren't considered disabled, as per Social Security, they will lose the ability to collect under your work record. In addition, if your child gets married, they may lose access to the parent's work record because typically when you marry, you would collect the spousal benefit, not a parent's benefit. There are certain exceptions if you also married someone who was disabled as a child. Now, there are ways to reduce countable income. We cover this in much more detail. We talk about working while on benefits when I'm here next month. But there are certain ways to reduce countable income through a concept called impairment-related work expenses. In the interest of time, I'm not going to cover it too much today, but just know that if your child is working, there's ways to reduce how their work counts against the limits for continuing to get these benefits. Let's go to the next page. The other way your child can collect Social Security benefit is off their own work record. While you and I can't get Social Security until we've worked 10 years, if you're younger, you don't need that much working. Now you get one work credit in a given year, this year, when you earn $1,730 throughout the year. If you earn 4 times that, or just under $7,000, you get 4 work credits. You can't get more than 4 credits in a year. If you make more than that, you just get more for your credit. But if you're only 24 when you become disabled, you only need 6 credits, or about a year and a half of work, to get a small SSDI benefit on your own work record. The amount of work you need goes up by basically 2 credits every year. And it kind of maxes out at 20 credits when you turn 31. What it means is, Connecticut is a work-first state in DDS. If your child is able to work, it's going to be good for them. They'll end up with more money. You always end up with more money if you work than if you don't work. But if they work just enough to earn some credits, they may start getting an SSDI benefit on their own work record. And that's not a bad thing. Let's go to the next slide. So I have this little chart up here. This is just because everyone gets SSI and SSDI mixed up. I wanted to have a little chart to go through what the differences are. Again, SSI is based on a financial need. SSDI is not. You have $1 million and get SSDI. SSI is for the disabled, blind, and disabled, the aged, blind, disabled, and being financially needy. SSDI is just having enough work credits. For the most part, SSDI is not reduced by working. It does get complicated. We'll cover this next month. We do working while on benefits. But for SSI, if you work, you're going to lose 50 cents the dollar after the full $85 exclusion. But the big thing is, with SSI, typically you have Medicaid. With SSDI, you have Medicare. Let's go to the next slide. So I promise we're almost going to finish. This is Medicare. Next slide. Most important thing is Medicare is not Medicaid. It's the health insurance program that seniors get and seniors like. But it's also available for people who've received SSDI for 24 months. There are 4 parts to Medicare: A, B, C, and D, just like Medicaid here in Connecticut. But A and B are the basics. A is hospital insurance, which is free. Part B is the medical insurance that allows you to see doctors. Part D is the drug coverage. And then the middle, Part C, is a Medicare Advantage plan. It's essentially an HMO version of Medicare that's available. Now, go to the next slide for a second. There's one thing important about Medicare is here we are. Medicare is not means tested. And here's an important piece. If your kid gets Medicare because they've been receiving an SSDI payment for 2 years, we have a special program here in Connecticut called QMB, Qualified Medicaid Beneficiary. And if you're on both Medicaid and Medicare, and you can be on both, Medicaid pays the Part B premium for Medicare. Part B to Medicare has a premium payment of $174 a year. $174 a month. That's the amount this year. If your kid gets Medicare, it's free for them if they're also on Medicaid. And it's going to be much better health insurance from a health insurance side than Medicaid for the most part for most of your kids. So I'm sorry I sped through the end. You can go to the next slide, Claudia. I'm sorry I sped through the end. I know folks' time is valuable, and I went 6 minutes over our hour, but I'm more than willing to stay and answer questions about any of the benefits. I think I covered most of the questions that folks put in the chat to start, but I'm certainly willing to do it. I can read them off.
Okay, great. Good.
I see
a few more that.
Yeah, I see a couple here at the bottom.
Great. Okay.
So
Quick questions. Is it okay to give a PDF version of the PowerPoint to folks?
Yes, but I want to be careful because a lot of the numbers are 2024 specific.
Mhm.
So most of the numbers, and I've labeled them as such, most of the numbers that are in here are only through the end of this year. And those numbers will change come January 1. So it may be less valuable to have this. What I find is people kind of like hold on to these things. And they look 3 years later, they're like, but I thought these were the numbers. And they're not.
Right.
And that's why this can be challenging because the numbers do change from year to year.
While we're answering questions, I'm going to launch a quick poll. If you can answer it, I would appreciate it.
Sure. So the first one, for a young adult who is on SSDI, is there any way to change to save money for future expenses and qualify for Medicaid? So the answer is yes. So there is, we're not doing this as part of this at this time. By the way, I do these workshops as webinars on a regular basis. And I have one that goes into greater length on something called an ABLE account, which is a specialized disability savings account that by law allows you to move money from your child's account into an ABLE account. And the ABLE account is not a countable asset towards the asset tests for Medicaid and SSI. So the short answer is, if your child wants to save their own money, if you want to save their SSI or SSDI money, the money can be legally transferred to an ABLE account, and it moves from a bucket that's counting against them to a bucket that's not counting against them. Someone says, who determines if the child is capable of substantial gainful activities and with what parameters? Well, that determination is done by Social Security. So when you apply for SSI, and these days you start the application online at the Social Security website, they will evaluate your child in the same way they evaluate anyone who's applying for disability benefits. Say the MTA worker who hurts their back and has to go on disability. They will be looking at your child's school records, your child's medical records, and an interview with your child to determine if they think they are capable of earning more than the substantial gainful activity amount. It is always better to apply as soon as your child turns 18 as possible. I meet some families of higher functioning kids, often with autism, where they don't want to put that in their heads that the kid's disabled. And they wait until the kid is 25 or 26 or 28. And that can cause issues with some of the ancillary benefits. Your child will never be as disabled as they are at 18, because as they grow, many of them will learn skills. But they will be looking at what they think your child is. There's no specific disability that says you are or are not disabled for sure. Certainly having an intellectual disability adds towards them not being able to work. But look at the adult with Down syndrome who played Corky on that show from the 90s or 80s. You know, there are people with Down syndrome who can hold full-time jobs. actually earning more than the SGA proves you can earn more than the SGA. But absent that, when your kid's 18, they're going to evaluate based on their disability in the medical and school records to make that determination. If your child, and it's different, they don't look at just IQ like DDS. They will be looking at the totality of what your child can do and will interview your child. If you get rejected, there is an appeals process. For most families, they will not need to hire an attorney to do the first application. But if you do get rejected, you might consider hiring an attorney who specializes in disability appeals. Someone just said, once a person is moved to Medicaid C, is there always a spend down? So let's take a step back. In order to qualify for Husky C, you have to have less than $1,600. If you have more than that, then you are ineligible to receive the Husky C services. Remember, and for Husky C, there's an asset test and an income test. If you have too much assets to qualify for Husky C, there are several strategies, including transferring funds to an ABLE account, which has certain limitations, or creating a first-party special needs trust and transferring the money there, which is legal. There are ways around the spend down. There are certain other issues with the income test for Husky C. A little beyond what I can cover in the 2 seconds I have to discuss this answer. But there are a variety of ways. One of the challenges with Husky C is the amount of income you can have depends on how you're accessing Husky C. If you are just looking for Husky C, but you're not on a waiver program, the income limits are lower than if you're on Husky C and a Medicaid waiver program. If you have too much income, we have a special Medicaid spend down program through an organization called Plan of Connecticut, which is our sole pooled trust here in Connecticut. If that is your situation, that is more than we can discuss here on a call like this, but I would have you reach out to Plan of Connecticut and an estate attorney who understands the issues to figure out the best way of structuring it. The next question is, how do we get rid of money we had in a minor savings account? Again, we can talk about this at an ABLE account. There's several ways to get rid of a minor savings account. One is you can spend the money on your child and keep a receipt, because you have to show what you did with the money. And you want to show that you spent it on your child. You didn't just steal their money. You don't want to be Gary Coleman's parents. For those of you who may be old enough like me, Gary Coleman was an actor in the 70s and 80s as a child, and his parents basically stole all his money. You're not allowed to steal your kid's money. The custodial account is your child's money. You have to either spend it on them or save it for them in an appropriate way. And transferring the money to an ABLE account is a great way of moving money from a pile that counts against them to a pile that doesn't. And transfers to an ABLE account are not subject to the Medicaid look back. So I think this is the last question I'm seeing so far. My child who is on SSDI was placed on Medicare. This created problems because it became the primary insurance over my insurance. Most of our pediatric providers do not accept Medicare. We needed to put on Medicare on hold. Was this a mistake? So there's lots of wonky things depending on how many different medical programs your child is on. Typically, only kids above the age of 18 will get Medicare. Because when your child's receiving, there are certain circumstances where a child is getting a Social Security payment as a minor, particularly if the parent has either themselves gone on disability or a parent has died. That will trigger a Social Security payment for a child under 18, but it's not an SSDI payment. The SSDI payment as Social Security disability income will only kick in at 18, at which point typically 2 years later, although in some circumstances 18 months, the child will get Medicare. Now, typically a child can be on two health insurance, but it gets a little wonky when they're on private health insurance, Medicare, and Medicaid. Um, and typically, because you're not getting Medicare until your child's over 18, at that point, they probably shouldn't be seeing pediatric providers anymore. It gets a little complicated. And I'm not sure how this particular person had put Medicare on hold. Sometimes you can put Medicare on hold if there is other insurance, which gets into whole wacky things with Medicare for seniors. But you may want to work to straighten some of this out. It's hard to give, again, advice in this way through this kind of service. But let me just see here. I don't see any other questions. There are other questions that folks have at this stage. Oh, thanks, and I'll turn it back over to Laura.
Great. Well, thank you everybody for joining us. This was very informative. And again, Michael will be back December 10th and he'll be talking about working with benefits. So thank you, everybody.
Thank you and have a good evening.
You too. Thank you.